We can still just give it like a couple minutes, but
Okay.
okay. Want to get started?
Yeah.
Okay. Jill, hey, would you mind just muting your volume for us?
Which I have to learn how to do this.
Okay.
Not sure how to do this.
I can do it for you.
This is the first time I've ever done Zoom, so I'm not really sure.
Here, I'll mute you. There.
We'll take you off like when questions come up and stuff, so you can talk then. No worries. Okay. Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Sadie Constantine, and I'm the conservation planner for the Worcester County Conservation District. And today we have Nicole from University of Rhode Island talking to us again about food preservation. And this time she's going to cover freezing and dehydrating. So Nicole, take it away.
Okay, hold on. Let me get my screen up.
Yep.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me just get my everything ready. I had to shrink this little box here. Okay. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about freezing and drying. And like Sadie mentioned, my name is Nicole Richards, and I'm at the University of Rhode Island. I've been co-teaching food preservation for over 10 years. I have a partner in crime here at the university who couldn't make it today. Her name is Sage Lanterman, and we usually co-teach a lot of these workshops together. We have a really fun hands-on workshop that we offer maybe once a year in the foods lab at URI, and it's fun because we do some hands-on canning with the water bath, and then we do the pressure canner. And then we incorporate a lot of this discussion of freezing and drying, which I'm going to talk about today. So first, we're going to start off with freezing. So what are the advantages to freezing? Unlike canning, many foods can be frozen. It's really easy to do, not time consuming. You can use a variety of container sizes. You're not limited to certain cans like you are if you're canning products. And it also allows for the retention of the color, flavor. It doesn't break down the nutritive value as much as canning does, or the heat from canning, and it maintains some of the texture of the food. So freezing is very convenient, I find. How does freezing affect foods? So there are it affects chemical reactions. There are enzymes that cause color and flavor changes in food. And then also lipids that are in the food might oxidize over time, causing rancid off odors. That's more common with meat and fish or anything with fat in it, not as much with fruits and vegetables. But in fruits and vegetables, we have enzymes that can cause changes over time. So we try to control those. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Freezing, it doesn't destroy microbial growth, but it slows it down, or it stops it, sorry, the refrigerator slows it down. In the freezer, it will stop the growth, but it won't destroy the bacteria. So when you thaw food, it's really important to thaw it in a way that doesn't allow that the bacteria to grow, which is why thawing food in the refrigerator is the best way you can thaw food. But there are other ways to thaw it, and I'll talk about that later on as well. Freezing impacts the texture of food. So the more water that there is in the food product, the more ice you might find in it as you freeze it. So like some foods don't freeze very well, like lettuce. But as water freezes, it expands, and these ice crystals cause cell walls to rupture. So produce with high water content doesn't tend to freeze very well. Like I said, lettuce is an example of that. But other products like broccoli can freeze very well. So when you're getting started with freezing, it's really important to start with the optimum maturity and freshness of the produce that you're going to freeze. Garbage in and garbage out. So freezing doesn't make anything better. So you want to make sure that you are at your optimum maturity and freshness for your produce. It's really important. Well, excuse me. You can wash and drain the produce. You don't have to do that first. But if you do wash and drain it, don't soak it, because that will allow it to absorb more moist water and you'll have more ice crystals. And it's really important when you're working and preparing food for the freezer that you keep your workspace clean. So, you know, keep your counters clean, use clean utensils and cutting boards. If you're going to cut produce, you know, meat, cut them separately, use different cutting boards, or make sure you wash and clean your cutting board in between really well. Hold on, I just have to take a sip of water. I'm getting over a cold, so my throat is like, has a tickle. So I mentioned enzymes not too long ago, and I just wanted to back up and explain what those are. Enzymes are naturally present in food. They're small proteins that can promote chemical reactions, such as the browning of the apple that you see on that screen. And the enzymatic activity can lead to deterioration of food quality. So enzymes are important for the fruit and vegetables to mature, but then at some point after you pick them, you want the enzyme activity to stop so that it doesn't continue to cause deterioration of the food quality. And freezing is something that will slow enzymatic activity down, but it doesn't stop it. So I'm going to talk about some ways that you can stop the enzymes in fruits and vegetables if that's something you choose to do. So how do we control enzymes in fruits and vegetables? In vegetables, you typically do so by blanching the vegetables. And blanching is just sticking the vegetable in boiling water for a period of time before taking it out and making sure that it's cooled in an ice bath or under cold running water. You can also, excuse me, it's also in fruits, you don't use heat, but you might use chemicals such as ascorbic acid, citric acid, lemon juice, or a sugar syrup. And I'm going to elaborate on all of these over the next few slides. So controlling enzymes in vegetables. Like I mentioned, blanching is typically used to control enzymes in vegetables, and blanching will prevent flavor and color changes during frozen storage. It will inactivate the enzymes. It can remove microorganisms that might be present on the outer surface. And there are different recommended blanching times for different vegetables. So you want to make sure you follow the recommended times. You can do a Google search online and probably find a table. The USDA has a table of recommended blanching times. So you could search for something. The Bald Blue Book also has some of the books. The book I have is the complete book, and it has a table of different blanching times. But under blanching can stimulate the enzymes and not fully stop them, whereas over blanching might cook the food product. So it's really important that you follow recommended blanch times for different vegetables. So how do you blanch vegetables? You use boiling water, and it's roughly a gallon of water per pound of vegetable. And then you want to start the timer once you add the vegetables when it begins boiling. So if you add the vegetables and the boiling sort of simmers down, you want to wait for it to come back to a boil before you start your timer. And then on the top, the picture on the top on this screen has a pot, but then that pot has an insert that's a strainer. I don't have one of those, but if I were to do a lot of blanching at home, I would think that might come in handy. Something like that. You can also steam blanch, and this it's not as fast as water blanching, but it's another alternative. You want to have about 1 to 2 inches of boiling water in the bottom of the pan. Put your vegetables in a single layer in the basket, like pictured on this slide, and start the timer when you cover the vegetable. And another thing we've heard about is microwave blanching, but this isn't recommended because it can result in uneven heating and it may not inactivate all the enzymes. So like I said, improper blanching can affect the quality of your frozen food, and you don't want to, microwave blanching isn't recommended. After blanching, it's important to cool quickly and thoroughly. So you might want to plunge that basket into a cold ice bath or cold running water. And the cooling time should equal about the same time that you blanched for. So if you blanched your vegetable for 1 to 2 minutes, you might want to cool it for 1 to 2 minutes. And then make sure that you drain it thoroughly before freezing. So controlling enzymes in fruits. There are different ways to do this. So I'm going to start off talking about the sugar sweetened options. You can make a syrup pack or a sugar pack. A syrup pack is just a percentage of sugar to water that depends on the sweetness desired, and you make a syrup, and then you pack your fruit in that syrup. Or a sugar pack where you sprinkle sugar over the fruit and allow the mixture to stand so that it makes a sugar syrup, and then you pack it in that syrup. And those are sweetened options, but not everyone wants to add sugar to their fruit. So there are unsweetened options. There's commercial mixtures available, which might be mixtures of ascorbic acid and sugar or citric acid and sugar. But there's also ascorbic acid, citric acid, lemon juice. You can heat the fruit, but that will depend on what texture you're interested in, because heating the fruit might cause it to break down and get a little mushier. And then there are other sort of things you can get, like a pectin syrup. You can use water, or you can use unsweetened juice. So again, like these are just options for preventing the fruit from darkening while it's frozen, but this is quality. It's not something that you necessarily have to do. It's not a safety issue. There are sugar substitutes out there, but those don't have, they don't help with color retention or texture like sugar does. So that's recommended that you use that. Just add it before eating. Now let's talk about packaging. There are a lot of different types of packages that you can use when you're freezing, which is nice. When you're canning, you're sort of limited to this, what the recipe is telling you is that the recipe was tested for, whether it be a pint or a quart. You usually don't have too many choices, but for freezing, you have a lot of choices. You want to make sure it's moisture vapor resistant, that it's durable and leak proof, and doesn't become brittle at low temperatures. It's important that the packaging materials are resistant to oil and grease or water, and that they protect food from absorbing off flavors and odors, and that it's easy to seal. So there's bags, there's Tupperware containers, there's a lot of options. When you're packing foods to be frozen, you want to make sure that you cool it first, and then pack the foods pretty tightly. Some foods might need some headspace, especially those that have water or liquid. So make sure that you leave enough headspace for it to expand when it freezes so it doesn't make a mess. Excuse me. Make sure that you have a tight seal and closure, and you can use freezer tape, but make sure above everything else that you label and date when you put everything in the freezer. So what are some other considerations for freezing? There are some things that you want to avoid, such as a fluctuating freezer temperature. This will cause the ice in the food to thaw and refreeze. And as this occurs, the ice crystals get bigger, and they can rupture cell walls of the food and cause it to become mushier and softer in texture. And this is a quality loss. And you might also lose the quality of your frozen product just due to being at a higher temperature. You want to make sure that you have not improperly packaged your food. That could lead to moisture loss, freezer burn, and those again are quality issues, not safety issues. As long as that frozen food is frozen, it is safe. Vacuum packaging is another thing that is, it can be confusing. Vacuum packaging is not a substitute for heat processing, refrigeration, or frozen storage. It doesn't eliminate bacterial growth, and certain pathogens really like that vacuum and that in the inside of that vacuum package. And so Clostridium botulinum is one of those organisms, and it can produce a dangerous and deadly toxin in that oxygen-free environment. So it doesn't mean don't use vacuum packaged things, but when you use them, what you want to do is cut several holes in the plastic so that you are eliminating the oxygen-free environment. You're allowing the air to get into that package, and then you can defrost that meat in the refrigerator, and you don't have to worry about Clostridium botulinum. But vacuum packaging is really nice for freezing because it's a tighter seal than you might get in a Ziploc bag, and you are going to get freezer burn will be slower than you might get in a bag that has a Ziploc bag. I don't tend to do very well with Ziploc bags for long-term frozen storage, but a vacuum bag seal bag is very nice for a longer-term frozen storage. But there are these things to be aware of when you're thawing food that's vacuum sealed, and you just want to make sure you open those bags. So I've talked about thawing food, and there's a few ways to thaw food. The best way is in the refrigerator because you're maintaining it at a cold temperature, but you can also thaw in the microwave, and then you want to immediately cook the food. And you can also thaw it in cold running water. And again, you want to cook the food after you thaw it that way. If you thaw something in the refrigerator and then decide, you're not going to cook it that night, you might cook it the next night, you can just leave it in the refrigerator. It's not a big deal. If you thaw it in the microwave and then you decide you don't want to cook it that night, it's already partially started cooking. So you're better off cooking it and then just putting it in the refrigerator or freezing it. So can food be refrozen once it's thawed? And the answer is yes, it can, but it depends. If it was thawed in the refrigerator, it can. If it's thawed and then you cook it, it can be frozen. And if it was previously frozen at a retail store, you can stick it in the freezer. When is it not safe to refreeze? And when you thaw something in the microwave or you thaw it in cold running water, it's not as safe to refreeze it without cooking it first because it's already been exposed to warmer temperatures. What if the freezer stops? This happens occasionally when we have storms up in the Northeast. And what's the basis for understanding when to throw food out and when you can save it? And the basis for that safety is temperature. If the food is still safe to use, if you have ice crystals, or if it's still cold. I had a freezer die on me the other week, and luckily I caught everything. It was still cold to the touch, so I stuck it in another freezer and everything was saved. I would have been devastated because I had a lot of meat in a frozen storage unit that decided to die. But if your freezer does die and you have a lot of things and you're trying to keep them cold because you don't have to throw them out yet, group frozen foods together. The more frozen foods you have in a small space, the colder it's going to keep the space, and cover the freezer with blankets to insulate it. So now let's move on and talk about dehydrating. The principles of food dehydration, they rely on three principles, and that's heat, dry air, and then the circulation of that air. And this helps to remove water. The removal of water will prevent the growth of any bacteria, yeast, and mold. And this prevents the food from spoiling, and it slows down enzymatic activity. By removing the water, you've created a shelf-stable product that doesn't need temperature control for safety. There are different ways you can dry foods. A food dehydrator is probably the easiest, and that's what's pictured on this slide. But you can also use your oven, but you usually have to put it on a really low setting and leave the door open because it actually doesn't get to the low enough setting that you need. It runs a little higher. If you use a microwave, you might have quality issues. It may not evenly dry the food, so I wouldn't recommend a microwave. Drying in the sun outdoors is not really recommended in Rhode Island, and there are food safety risks from birds and pests that are outside. We have too much humidity to really successfully dry outside. But you can dry indoors in air, and I'll talk about that. That can be useful, especially with herbs. So there are different recommended temperatures for drying. Herbs, nuts, and seeds are the lower temperature, whereas fruits and vegetables are a little higher, followed by meats and fish. If you dry too slowly, you might have bacterial growth. And if you dry too fast, you might cook the food or have result in case hardening, which is where the outside sort of hardens, but the inside is still soft and has moisture, and the moisture can't really get out. So it's really important that you dry at a good rate as well. You don't want to dry too fast. So let's start with talking about fruits. So you can pre-treat fruit so it doesn't brown when you dry it. These are optional steps. You do not need to do any of these. But to prevent fruit from darkening, which is caused by oxidation, you can use sulfite dips or sulfuring, ascorbic acid, or syrup blanching. If you use sulfur or sulfur dips, just be aware that some people are allergic to sulfur. But again, this is optional, and this is just to control darkening. But if it's not an issue for you, it doesn't matter. How do you determine the dryness of fruit? You want to cut several cooled pieces in half, and you shouldn't be able to see any visible moisture or squeeze out any moisture, and it shouldn't feel very sticky or tacky. After drying, you want to make sure you cool completely before packaging and use food grade containers. Don't pack too soon, or there could be moisture buildup that could occur, and that could result in mold growth. On the flip side, you don't want to wait too long because your product that you cooled might absorb some moisture from the air. One thing you can do is condition your fruits, and this allows you to equalize the moisture. So you can pack your cooled fruit into a plastic or glass jar, seal it, and let it stand for a few days. Shake the jar daily and check for condensation. If condensation occurs, return to the dehydrator for more drying. However, if you see mold, then you want to discard your food. For vegetables, where it's blanching is one way to control vegetable darkening as they are frozen. Follow recommended times for blanching and start the timer when the water returns to a boil after you've added the vegetables. And again, like I mentioned before, steam blanching is another alternative. You want to make sure it's heated through but not cooked. And you lose less water steam blanching, which is why some people might be interested in that versus water blanching. I mean, less water-soluble vitamins from the vegetables, what I meant to say. So how do you determine the dryness of vegetables? You want to dry vegetables until they're brittle or crisp, and you don't need to condition them like fruits because they have a lower moisture content to begin with. For herbs, you can dry them in the dehydrator. You can use a microwave for herbs. You want to place 4 or 5 herb branches between 2 paper towels and microwave for a few minutes. And just keep doing this and then check them to see if they're dry or brittle, and keep doing that in intervals until you dry them. And you can also dry herbs indoors if the conditions are right. You need a well-ventilated space. You can put them in a paper bag to protect them from dust and pollutants, and cut some holes in the bag so that the air can circulate and help them dry out. There are different pros and cons to dehydrating food. Dehydrated food has more nutritional value than canning. Like I said, the heat can impact some of the nutrients in fruits and vegetables. So, freezing has the least impact, followed by dehydrating, followed by canning. Finished product also doesn't take up valuable space in your refrigerator, and it's pretty easy and quick to get going. Some of the cons are that it has less nutritional value than freezing does. You might want to invest in a dehydrator to safely preserve foods at home, but they're not that expensive. So lastly, I want to talk about storage. And when you're storing dried produce, you want to just remember that it can reabsorb moisture. So you want to make sure the food is cooled. You can use plastic bags, glass jars, plastic containers, pack in smaller amounts. Storage times range from 4 months to 1 year, depending on different factors, such as the environment, temperatures. Glass containers are good because you can see any condensation that develops. And if you have any moldy food, you want to discard it or compost it. Does anyone have any questions, or do you want to talk about freezing or drying, or even if you have canning questions? I'm here to answer any questions that you have. I'm going to stop the share.
Would you mind taking Jill off mute in case she wants to
Oh, yes.
ask any questions?
Hold on, I'm trying to figure out how to do that now.
So I have a question about microwaving.
Mhm.
I've done herbs in the microwave, and one of the cautions that I always give in my classes that I teach on dehydrating is you can start a fire. You got to be really, really careful
Yeah.
with them because even with paper towels or any kind of plate you put in there, I've noticed sparking happen.
Okay.
So I would just want to pass along that
Oh, thank you.
that warning.
Maybe I'll take that one off.
You could
and
start your
just-
kitchen on fire. I just always tell people to stand there and watch it. Just do it for short periods of time, like 30-second bursts or something. It does work, but you just have to be really careful because it seems like the second and third time of those 30-second bursts is when it might start sparking. So just be very, very careful.
Okay, good. Thank you for letting me know.
Sure.
Where do you
Safety
teach?
first.
Yeah, I know. You teach food preservation too?
I teach gardening classes in general. So I teach,
Oh, great.
I have a tea from your garden class that I teach. And so preserving
cool.
herbs is one of those, is in that class.
Oh, great.
I have a question about freezing apples.
Uh-huh.
Would I peel those first and then slice them? And
It really depends on what you want to do. That's the nice thing is you can do whatever you want. It's like with canning, sometimes you have to take the skin off or you don't. It's more prescriptive. What are you using the apples for?
well, I'm down the road for bacon.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm gonna bake with them, like make a apple crisp or anything like that, apple bread. So I wasn't sure, like, is it better to keep the peels on because it will freeze better with them on?
Oh, it won't matter. The peels
No.
will just, when they freeze and thaw, it's the apple, the flesh that's going to be impacted more. The peels won't really because there's not moisture in them. They're harder.
Okay, and then would I just freeze them flat, like in it, like you were saying, like maybe a freezer bag?
Yeah. One thing you can do is you can get like a tray and just line them out and freeze them, and then you can put them in a bag even.
Okay, that makes sense.
That's one thing like you can do with berries too.
And how long would they stay in the freezer, like for storage?
So as long as it's frozen and frozen temperatures are maintained with regards to safety, it's safe. But it's going to be about quality, and when over time you might see color changes. And so it's going to just depend on what's acceptable to you, sort of.
Okay, yeah, so if they're gonna be baked, maybe it's not gonna matter as much with the color.
Exactly. Or the texture even, because they'll
Yeah.
get softer.
Right.
So yeah.
All right, that's good to know. Thank you.
One of the things I'm working on right now is garden huckleberries. I'm
Mhm.
processing them. I just picked them from the garden, and I'm thinking about freezing them for later, for when I have time to make jelly out of them. Is that a problem to freeze the berries first and then
Nope.
can them later?
Not at
Okay,
all.
okay,
I've done
good.
that too.
Great.
I know sometimes it's just easier. Like the woman I co-teach with, does a lot more canning than me, and she freezes a lot of the stuff, because also in the summer when you're harvesting everything, you don't want to have a hot kitchen of canning. So sometimes she'll
Exactly.
freeze a lot of things for the fall and do it then.
Yeah, when you have time.
I know.
There's not enough hours in the day for a gardener who's trying to preserve their food too.
Oh, I know. I can imagine.
So I have a question. You
Yeah.
you talked about like drying indoors, and like the first thing that pops into my head is like the image of herbs hanging in the hallway at the Freeman Farm at Ulsterbridge Village as a living history museum. And I was wondering, is there anything else that you could dry indoors or no?
Not around here, not because we just don't have the heat and dry. We have too much humidity. So I think herbs are pretty much, and spices are pretty much as far as we can go. I don't think it's going to be enough heat and dryness.
Okay. Yeah, and that's what I was, so I know you have to say Rhode Island because you're coming from Rhode Island, but pretty much for the Northeast, it's just too much
Yeah.
humidity to dry outside or anything.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
like if Arizona might, something like Arizona might be a little different in terms of what they can do outdoors in some of that dry heat they get. But then you have to think about like the pests, where's the space where you're going to dry it? Can you protect it from pests and birds flying overhead and things like that? I mean, with a lot of our dried spices and herbs that we get at the grocery store, even filth is like an issue because of how they're handled. It's just, they're thrown on the ground and they're just left there to dry. And then we have things like salmonella that can survive in dry environments. And so it's just, it's really interesting.
Okay.
It's good incentive to grow your own.
I know. I know.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I have a sage plant out in the front yard, and I always think like, oh, I'll just, grab some and hang it. But then I've read like, oh, you gotta be careful because, moisture in between the leaves and stuff. So do you know of any like, would it be better to like pick it in like the afternoon when everything's dry? Because I've also read like people will pick their herbs earlier in the morning because they have the best flavor or something with the moisture in the air. It's like really good as far as the quality of the spice goes and the herb. But then I think, well, if I'm going to hang them and dry them, maybe I don't want to pick them so early in the morning when they're dewy.
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, that's a trade-off. And you know what? I don't know that it really makes that much difference of picking them in the morning or the afternoon as far as the oils, the essential oils that are in them. That's supposedly why you're supposed to pick them at the heat of the day. But to your point, I think at least in our area, it'd be smarter to pick them when they're very dry.
Okay.
Now, having said that, I wash mine. I know you're not supposed to do that, but getting back to what Nicole was saying about the dirt and the bugs and the stuff on them, I'm always amazed at what comes off of there when I rinse them off. And I think it's just like, the rain does the same thing. So it took me a long time to find out why they recommend that you don't wash them. And it's just because it could potentially take longer to dehydrate them, and you would lose nutrients. But honestly, I just let them air dry from the rinsing, and then I put them in my dehydrator and they come out just fine. And I don't have any bugs to worry about. So,
yeah, I know.
Or dust or, anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, washing is, it's always like, oh, wash it first. But then it's like some things don't hold up as well. So it depends on when you're going to handle it. If you're going to handle fruits and like berries right away, it's okay to wash them. But if you're going to handle them later, maybe you wash them before you handle them.
Right. Yeah. Especially raspberries.
Yeah.
Yeah, my parents had that toss up they did with blueberries one year. And I think it was just, because the blueberries were in, they went and my dad just like picks and picks and picks and then he brings them home. And my mom, it's up to her then to like wash and package. And she didn't have the time for it. So I think one year she just threw them in the freezer bag because they freeze really well. They're pretty, individual. But then after, and it was like the after fact where it's like, how do I wash this now? How do I, so in the moment it was, I need to get these in the freezer. And then afterwards it was like, crap, I missed my window for washing them because you're not going to defrost them and, wash them so.
No, I always battle with that with the frozen berries when I freeze them myself. And ultimately I end up not washing them and I just eat them because I'm always afraid the water is going to ruin them. And then, I mean, it's a hit or miss. I mean, sometimes things are there and even if you wash them, washing is really bugs and filth. I don't know that it's always going to get a pathogen off if it's there.
Right.
Maybe if it's an apple, you can wash it off. But like for berries and lettuce, I'm like, it's there. So I just go with it.
A lot of times with the lettuce in my garden and, maybe from the store, if it's not too bad, like I hit that point where it's like, I'm just like, making a sandwich quick and I'm like, oh, I didn't wash this, or I don't want to take the time when I come home, so I just kind of like wipe it on a towel and then throw it on my sandwich or something.
We all do it.
With the berries, I've had really good luck because I have tons and tons of blueberries and raspberries and ground cherries and all kinds of stuff. And what I do is I pick them, I bring them in, and within like an hour or two, I'll just give them a quick rinse and put them in a colander, and then I spread them out on a cookie sheet with a paper towel or a towel underneath them. And just roll them around a little bit, which gets the extra moisture off and basically, they dry pretty quickly. So, and then I put them in freezer bags, right? That same day. So like that afternoon. And that way the mold doesn't have time to grow. All the bug stuff is off of them, and they freeze beautifully.
Oh yeah, that's nice. Yeah, blueberries are a little hardier skin.
Yeah, but even the raspberries, it works.
Oh,
I
good.
think that the secret is the paper towel, or the I just use like sometimes like a linen towel underneath, and that
Mhm.
gets the extra moisture off, so they don't get the frost burn, the extra frost on the outside. Just make sure
Yeah.
they're relatively dry. You can put a little bit of bleach in a solution to wash the raspberries, to keep them from molding. And I've tried that. It does work, but I don't really want bleach on my raspberries. So I
I
just
know.
make sure I process them quickly enough. And usually, you've got like half a day before
Yeah.
they'll start going bad. So I just process them and then get them in the freezer ASAP.
Oh, that's good. Thank you.
Now, what do you think about the organic? Is that much better, obviously, on the fruits? Like, you don't have to
Um,
wash them as much, or?
from a food safety point of view, there's no difference. You have the same food safety risks, whether it's organic or conventional.
Okay, but I'm saying like with spraying, spraying them and washing them, trying to get the, if they're not organic, you get them from the supermarket, spraying them with, I know they have a fruit and veggie spray.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'm
Those
wondering,
I think good old water and just scrubbing with water is just as good as those sprays from what I've read.
okay,
So you don't need to spend the money on that.
yeah.
Now, what about like soaking, like, because I know certain fruits will like take on water, like blueberries, I hear like take on water. So you're not supposed to like fill your sink and dump them in and let them soak. So what about that when it comes to like freezing or dehydrating? Does it just take more time? There's more moisture content,
Yeah, well, if it soaks up more moisture and then you freeze it, you might have more ice crystals, so it could impact the quality more so that way. And then with drying, it might just take longer to dry.
okay. I really want to get a dehydrator now, especially because I'm thinking like, oh, I could just dehydrate like mixed vegetables and put them in a jar and then pull them out when, I want to make like a stir fry or something.
Yeah, yeah. I know, yeah, there's a lot more dehydrating and freezing, I think. Like I haven't done a lot of dehydrating, but I want to do more of it when I have more time. I just have more frozen stuff than anything because it's just so much easier to do.
Yeah, I had that with tomatoes this year. I borrowed this massive dehydrator from some friends of ours. They do jerky, and that's the only time they use it. So I was like, oh, I'll just borrow that. I wanted to do tomatoes because we love tomatoes in this house, but I'm like, how do I capture them at like their peak freshness, but then also try to use them again as like a slice instead of canned? And I didn't get around to it. And eventually it came
Yeah.
down to this thing is on my table taking up so much space. It needs to go. I'm just going to can the rest of them.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes it's just, there's not enough time.
Yeah. I actually, though, we make tomato pies, and I was asked multiple times, hey, can we freeze these tomato pies? And I kept thinking, no, like it's not, the tomatoes going to be too, I was thinking freezing them raw, like, make it and then freeze it and then pull it out and cook it. And I was like, no, it's not going to work. Like tomatoes are there's too much moisture. But then I thought maybe if I go through, I cut them and I salt them and I pat them out and then make the pie. But then if I cook the pie and then freeze it, that might work better. I think I'm gonna try one and see how that goes, because it'll still taste okay, but I don't want it to be like a wet, gross mess either.
Yeah.
Can you send along that recipe for tomato pie? That sounds interesting.
Oh yeah, there's a whole lot of different ones. So the
Yeah.
one I make, there's some with like ricotta. My boyfriend doesn't like ricotta, so this one is like cheddar. But yeah, no, absolutely, I can include that. I can just find. I have your email, I'm sure, in the registration. So yeah, I can
That'd
send
be
that
great.
along.
Can
It's
you use
really
green tomatoes
easy.
or tomatillos? I have a lot of
Pretty
green
much.
tomatoes right now.
I know. My mom and I had the same issue with the green tomatoes, but what we did was we picked them all and then put them under her grow light that she has for plant starting, and that's how I have red tomatoes again on my kitchen table, staring at me, needing to be used.
Oh, interesting. I don't think you need the grow light. Just saying. I just put mine on my kitchen counter. I think they'll ripen on their own without the light.
We had too
Well,
many.
Also a paper bag. The brown paper bags are good to put them
Yeah,
in.
that's another trick.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we had a lot, and so my mom has this. My brothers had they had train tracks on it and trains. It was like this table that folded up. So my mom folds it down, and that's where she does all of her garden prepping. And so we have a big enough space to put the huge amount of green tomatoes we had, because it happened to both of us, where we had like a big another push with the tomatoes, but then it was too cold, and so they
Yep.
weren't going bad, but they were just sitting there not ripening. So.
Yep.
Yeah, so we spread them all out, but yeah, because we didn't have the counter space to handle the green tomatoes.
Counter space is a premium, I must say. Now I freeze my tomatoes too. The ones I can't use during the summer. I had 60 some plants for like 2 people, which was a few extras. So I throw them in a Ziploc bag and put them in the freezer. Both the cherries or the bigger ones I'll cut up, and they're great for making sauce or cook salsa or anything like that. So I know a lot of people think you can't freeze tomatoes, but you absolutely can. They just don't. They're not going to come out fresh, obviously, but they're
Yeah,
perfectly good for other uses.
right. I agree. I've done that too.
When you're freezing them, and I'm assuming your plan is then like sauce or something that's going to be, not a solid tomato.
Correct.
What do you do with it beforehand? Do you like blanch it and freeze them as like a whole blanched one, or do you just throw them in cut them up? What do you do?
Blanching them would be too much work. I rinse them off. I try to make things as simple as possible because I've got so much stuff. So I rinse them and dry them, kind of like I do the berries, and then I just throw them in a Ziploc baggie. When I make my spaghetti sauce and salsas and stuff, I include the skins because a lot of the nutrients are in there, and I run everything through the food processor, so it just chops them up, and I just use the whole tomato. So I have tons of cherries. The cherries are really good because they make nice sweet sauce. But if it's the bigger tomatoes, I'll probably like cut them into quarters or something, just so they fit in the bag better.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you if they're hard to handle, like because they were frozen, and then if you're cutting them up for like salsa or something, like if you want the chunks, like is it harder to handle because they were frozen and now they've defrosted, and are they just like the moisture content?
No, I usually just pour them into the pan. But the other good thing about freezing is if when you're cooking salsas and sauces, it tends to be very watery, and you have to cook them down for a long period of time. The freezing process actually, explodes those water molecules, and so if you just let them defrost on your counter for, I don't know, half an hour or so, or put it in the microwave and start defrosting it, you can pour a lot of that water off, and it speeds up the cooking process. So that's really handy. It just, like I said, it speeds up the process. You don't have to cook them down nearly as much because it's pretty much just the water that's pouring off. You've still got all the tomato meat left in the bag.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. I just always, hey, it's extra water, not water that was already there. I didn't think about that.
So try it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was something like I look up things like how to like deal with the tomatoes or whatever, and like just throw them in a bag and throw them in the freezer. Our only problem is we have animals, and so we have meat in the freezer a lot of times. So like the freezer space is also a commodity. So
a premium, yes, yeah.
That's what
we had
get.
to
We get
resort
like
to a new
cow.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
this one.
I think my mom said she has 7 hams in the freezer right now because
Wow.
you have 4 for each animal, or 2 for each animal at the minimum if you butcher them differently, depending on how you butcher them. So that's a lot of ham, and we don't have ham dinner often enough apparently to take care of it. So, and we're at a point right now where it's like trying to get like things out of the freezer so you can put things back in the freezer. So well, this has been fantastic. Is anybody else, are we all set with questions, or?
Thank you
Thank
very
you for
much.
joining. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you. And I will send along that tomato pie recipe.
I'm just gonna
Thank
put
you.
in the chat, I put an evaluation. I'm supposed to evaluate everything I do. It's a 4-question thing. If you could just answer the questions, it's anonymous. I don't even know who answers it, or if you do or don't, but I would appreciate it. I just use it for reporting.
Okay. Would you like me to send that out to people then?
Sure.
Okay.
If they don't get it off the chat, yeah, that would be great if you could do that. Thank you.
Okay. I'll pull that up, and I will send that along.
Okay, thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you so much for coming and doing this with us. And I hope we can find more things to talk about in the future.
Yeah, sounds good.
Awesome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.